Chapter 6. Holly woke to the sounds of shouts and laughter as people in the house got ready for the day. Albus was teasing Rose, calling her a scaredy cat. Rose was arguing back. Lily couldn't find her hair ribbon. Hugo wanted his turn in the loo. Holly dressed quickly and went downstairs into the kitchen, waving to Phineas Black as she passed. He gave a friendly wave back. The kitchen was already full of people. Mr. and Mrs. Weasley, Ron and Hermione, as Cousin Harry called them, were seated, eating their food. They looked up and nodded a cheerful greeting when they saw Holly. A very old, short, bald house elf was busy serving them seconds. He had huge, bat-like ears, bulging eyes, and was dressed in a snowy white towel with a gold locket dangling from his chest. "Ah, you're up," said Cousin Harry to Holly, noting her arrival. He was seated next to Ginny. Ginny looked and smiled at Holly as she entered. "Good morning," said Ginny. Ginny looked just as tired as the night before. Holly could tell she felt that way, too. "Have a seat," Ginny suggested, pointing to an empty chair next to James. Holly pulled back the chair and sat down. James had almost finished his own breakfast. "Creature," said Cousin Harry to the house elf that was moving over to Holly carrying a serving dish. The elf's ears perked up as he looked at Cousin Harry. "Yes, sir?" he asked, stopping in place. "I know you've seen her before," began Cousin Harry, "but I don't believe you've been formally introduced. This is my cousin, Miss Holly Wycliffe. She'll be staying with us occasionally." "Yes, sir," said the elf cheerfully. "Pleased to meet you," he added to Holly. "Holly," added Cousin Harry, "this is Creature, our house elf. Creature is an excellent cook, among other things." "Pleased to meet you, too, Mr. Creature," said Holly solemnly, holding out her hand to shake his. As she did so, Holly looked with interest at the gold locket hanging from Creature's neck, knowing now that it came from somebody named Regulus Black. Creature looked surprised and embarrassed at the offered hand. He looked uncertainly at Cousin Harry, who smiled and nodded encouragingly at Creature. Creature transferred his spoon into the dish, freeing up a hand which he then hesitantly placed in Holly's. "Thank you so much for your help last year," said Holly, shaking Creature's hand gently. Creature had brought her a special book last spring so she could write her parents and let them know she was okay after getting trapped by Tom Riddle. "You remembered," the house elf eagerly said, and began to shake her hand enthusiastically in return. "You are so very kind to remember, but I didn't do anything special. I was just doing my job." "Well, I'm glad you did," said Holly. "What do you have in that bowl?" she asked, looking at the dish of food Creature was carrying. "It's scrambled eggs with cheese and ham, miss," replied Creature. "Would you like some?" "Yes, please," said Holly. "Would it be possible for you to get a small bowl of oatmeal for my cat Sasha?" she asked while Creature dished up the eggs. "Yes, miss, right away," replied Creature cheerfully. "Perhaps she would like a bit of ham with that, too." "I'm sure she would," said Holly. "Thank you so much for suggesting it." She began to eat her food. "This is really quite good," Holly told Creature while he prepared a dish for Sasha. Creature's ears turned pink with pleasure at the compliment. Rose and Albus came in, joining the group at the table while still arguing. Lily appeared. She looked upset. Holly guessed she was sad, knowing that the house would soon be empty again. Hugo brought in a large spider, slipped it to Albus, who promptly dropped it on the table in front of Rose. Rose shrieked and dropped her glass, which shattered, splashing milk everywhere. By the time everything got cleaned up, it was time to leave. Stan was already loading his cab with bags when Holly stepped outside. Holly watched in fascination as he placed bag after bag after bag with ease into the trunk, followed by 3 large cages containing owls. Next, everyone piled into the taxi, which again expanded to permit a comfortable fit. "Did Grandmama remember to send my bag?" inquired Rose anxiously while looking around. "Yes, dear," replied Mrs. Weasley while strapping herself in. "It's already in the trunk with the rest of your things." "Good," said Rose, settling back in her seat. "There's a book on runes in it that I was reading," she added while hunting for her seatbelt. "Is everyone ready?" called out Stan from over his shoulder. "Great," he said, hearing no disagreement. With a lurch, the taxi took off, zipping its way through traffic. In no time at all, they were parked in front of King's Cross Station. Mr. Weasley and Ginny got some luggage carts while Stan started unloading the taxi. 3 filled cartloads later, they all waved goodbye to Stan. Stan raced off to pick up his next Hogwarts family, while the group walked into the station. Ron hurried on ahead with Rose's things so he could load them onto the train sooner. Cousin Harry and Ginny wheeled the other 2 carts in. Holly took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and hung onto a cart as they hurried into platform 9 3/4. The station was already filled with people and animals. James grabbed some of the luggage and got onto the express. He returned a few minutes later without the luggage, saying he had found the compartment where Mark and Becky were sitting. They were Holly's best friends, so James grabbed Holly's bags and moved her things in with him. After the luggage was all loaded on the express, the goodbyes were said. The next thing Holly knew, she was on the train sitting with her friends, speeding back to Hogwarts. "Hey, Holly?" James's head poked through Holly's compartment door. "Yes?" Holly was relaxing with her friends. They had already exchanged summer stories. Holly's was much abbreviated. Passed out gifts and enjoyed a nice lunch together. At the moment, Mark Owens was deeply engrossed in using Holly's spell tester. Mickey O'Toole sat examining his latest buys from Weasley's. Becky Smith was watching Sasha chase a salmon moth, and Susan Braesbury was making a new cricket cage with her sister Carrie. Carrie had short red hair, green eyes, and lots of freckles like her big sister Susan. This would be her first year at Hogwarts. Carrie was hoping she would get into Hufflepuff so she could be with Susan. While Carrie did not share Susan's love for insects, she enjoyed building things, like cages. The two were discussing Weasley jokes snacks while they worked. Animal crackers were still popular. Chew a cracker and sound like the animal shape just eaten. The Forever Belly burping beans had become a big hit. Holly was glad she could block and wouldn't have to worry about burping with the other students this year. Mickey had already swallowed a few and was happily burping away. "Can I borrow you for a few minutes?" James asked. Sure," said Holly. "I guess." She got up and followed James out into the passageway. "What's up?" "I need your help to settle a little disagreement," he said as he walked down the passage. Rose opened her bag, and a huge bug flew out of it. She's sure Albus put it there, but he denies it. They've been arguing about it ever since. I need you to determine if Albus is telling the truth, he explained. "I figure," James added, "when there's a lie detector in the family, we should make use of it." "But Madame Pomfrey said I can't rely on my senses alone for things like that," protested Holly while following James. "Maybe," agreed James, "but you know Albus. I don't think he can slip one past you." "True," agreed Holly thoughtfully. While they walked, Holly decided to try some of the things Hila Winonan asked her to do. She had already discovered that when she blocked, she couldn't read the emotions behind the doors. So Holly cautiously dropped her block. A surge of emotions came through, but more muffled because of the doors. Holly approached the next compartment and paused. 1, 2, 3, 6 different emotions inside. Then she peeked through the window. 6 people were inside. "Very good," she congratulated herself. Holly moved on to the next compartment. 4 emotions. 4 people. That wasn't so hard. When James opened his compartment and entered, Holly paused outside first. 6 emotions, one of which was extremely scared and confused. Who could that be? A first year, most likely. Holly looked inside and counted. 5 people. What happened? Holly stepped inside, closed her eyes, and counted again. Now there were only 5 emotions inside, and none of them were scared. Where was the scared person? Was there ever a scared person, or had Holly just imagined it? "Holly," said Albus, interrupting Holly's thoughts, "tell her I didn't do it." "He didn't do it," replied Holly promptly. Albus oozed sincerity without an ounce of guilt. "But he must have," protested Rose. "A bug that large just doesn't jump into a bag to hide. Someone had to have put it there." "Well, it wasn't Albus," concluded Holly firmly. "James, did you do it?" James looked at Holly directly, fixing his hazel eyes on hers. "Nope," he said. "Wasn't James either," said Holly confidently. "How about you, Taylor?" Taylor was Albus's friend. "Did you slip it in when Rose wasn't looking?" "No, I did not," he replied promptly. "And I doubt Lawrence did it either," added Holly, referring to James's friend, who was also in the compartment. "But I'll ask. Lawrence, did you put the bug in Rose's bag?" "Of course not," he replied promptly. "Why would I?" He was a bit old for pranks like that anyway. "Well, there you have it," concluded Holly. "Unless you did it yourself, nobody in this compartment slipped a bug into your bag." "Hugo must have done it," asserted Rose grumpily, unwilling to concede the event had occurred by chance. Hugo was her little brother. "He is so lucky he's not here now." "No, he didn't," replied Albus confidently. "He would have told me if he had, so I would know to watch for your reaction. Face it, that bug just got into your bag on its own. Where is it, anyway?" Everyone looked around the room. "He must have flown out," said James unconcerned. "Anyway, thanks, Holly," he added. "Now, maybe we can have some peace in here." "No problem," she replied, and left the compartment. On the way back to her own compartment, Holly decided to try counting emotions again. 5 emotions, 5 people. Good. 4 emotions, 4 people. 9 emotions? That was a lot for one compartment. Holly looked quickly inside. She could only see 8 heads. There was somebody scared within. Maybe someone was hiding. Holly slid open the door for a closer look. Yes? Came an icy Slytherin voice from within. Holly recognized the owner of the voice as Tom Richards, the Slytherin prefect. Nothing, she mumbled. My mistake, and swiftly closed the door. Her quick glance inside hadn't revealed anyone else, and she didn't want to antagonize the Slytherins further. Holly resumed blocking, not wanting to feel any more Slytherin emotions, and continued on to her compartment, feeling very frustrated. Why couldn't she get the numbers right? The Hogwarts Express pulled up to the Hogsmeade station after dark. Holly gathered her things and joined the others out on the platform. "First years, this way!" called a familiar voice. Holly turned and saw the gigantic outline of Hagrid at the other end of the platform. He was beckoning terrified-looking new students forward for their traditional journey across the lake, or so Holly presumed. Holly had never made that trip as she had arrived late. Becky told her about it later. "It'll be okay," assured Susan. She was talking encouragingly to her little sister Carrie. Susan gave Carrie a quick hug before pushing her forward towards the end of the platform. "I'll see you later," Susan called out as Carrie vanished into the crowd. "Look at that," said Becky, pointing to the stagecoaches rolling up. The stagecoaches lined up around the platform. One in front rolled forward on its own, stopping at the platform where the waiting students quickly got in with their things. Then the stagecoach rolled away, presumably towards Hogwarts, and another stagecoach rolled forward, stopping at the platform. "I wonder how they do that," added Becky curiously. "It isn't a spell," commented Mark. "They're pulled by thestrals. It's in Hogwarts, a history." "What's a thestral?" asked Mickey curiously. "Well," began Holly, thinking back on her visits to feed the thestrals last year. "It's some sort of an animal," she told him. "I think they're about as tall as you." Mickey was almost 1.5 meters tall. "And they eat meat." "Raw meat," added Becky, pleased to be able to add to the conversation. "But what do they look like?" insisted Mickey. "I don't know," replied Holly, exasperated. "They're invisible." "No, they're not," came an authoritative voice from behind them. The group turned to look at the speaker. Paige Crowley was walking forward with her boyfriend, Tom Richards. Beneath her house robes was a form-fitting green and white dress with a swirling design that seemed to wrap around her body, and, as last year, her waist-long, sleek black hair was tied neatly to one side with several matching ribbons tied around it, all spaced equally down the hair's length. Tom usually had an angry expression with emotions to match, but today there was a superior, smug smile on his face as he escorted Paige. Tom's brother Anthony and his friend Scorpius Malfoy followed closely behind. "Thestrals have black skeletal-like bodies with black leathery wings," continued Paige informatively as the group swept their way past Holly and her friends, neatly cutting ahead of them and moving to the front of the line. Scorpius and Anthony smirked at the Hufflepuffs while directing their wands behind them as they walked. Holly and Becky ducked, barely avoiding the Slytherin luggage that floated past and bumped into unwary students while hurrying to catch up with the Slytherin group. "I'm not surprised you've never seen one," added Paige loudly while the others loaded the luggage. "You have to be very special indeed to see a thestral." Tom laughed appreciatively at her words while he helped her into the stagecoach. The door closed and it rolled swiftly off. "That's not true," began Mark authoritatively. "Actually, the only people who can see—" "Holly!" broke in a voice from behind her. Holly turned to see Albus making his way through the thinning crowds. Albus's face was white as a sheet. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. That was always possible at Hogwarts, of course, but that didn't explain the panicked jumble of emotions Holly felt coming from Albus as he neared her. Guilt, grief, disbelief, and desperation all rolled into one. "Albus!" she exclaimed as he drew near. "What's wrong?" "You can see them too, can't you?" he insisted desperately, his green eyes brimming with tears. "Tell me you can see them too." "See what?" asked Holly, confused. "Them!" insisted Albus, pointing at the blank area in front of the stagecoaches. "They're not thestrals, are they? You can see them too, can't you?" Holly stared intently at the front of the stagecoach, now rolling off, seemingly of its own volition. "No, Albus, I can't," she told him regretfully, as another stagecoach rolled up. Mark and Becky started loading their things into the stagecoach. "I can't see anything at all." "I don't know if they're Thestrals," added Holly. "They're invisible, remember?" "No!" moaned Albus, his grief so strong it was palatable. Albus buried his face in his hands. "I killed him! I killed him! I killed him!" he said repeatedly, as he blindly staggered off. What was going on? "Holly!" There was a hand on her shoulder, and Holly whirled to face James. James was looking and feeling extremely worried. Something terrible must have happened. "I've got to talk to you," James said urgently. "Holly!" Holly spun around towards the new sound. It was Mark. "We're ready," he told her when he saw her looking his way. "You coming?" Holly looked at Albus off to the side, with grief pouring out of him like a beacon, surrounded by Rose and Taylor, both trying without luck to console him. She glanced at James, who still had his hand firmly on her shoulder, his face filled with worry, distress, and concern, radiating emotions to match. "You go on without me," she told Mark. "I'll catch up later." Mark nodded. He shut the stagecoach door, and it rolled away. Holly let James lead her to the back of the platform where they could talk more privately. "It's got to be the room," he began without preamble. "Did somebody die while you and he were in that room?" "What room?" asked Holly, confused. "What are you talking about?" "The trophy room," insisted James impatiently. "Did somebody die while you two were in the trophy room?" "Trophy room?" Holly suddenly realized James didn't really mean the trophy room, but the cursed room within the trophy room that she and Albus had been trapped in last year. "No," she exclaimed. "Nobody died in there," she insisted. "There was just the two of us." James nodded. "That's what Albus says. But it's got to be the room. It's the only time he's been on his own, and something could have happened. Something must have happened. Look at him," James insisted, directing Holly's attention to Albus. "I don't understand," exclaimed Holly while watching Albus. He looked and felt like a total emotional wreck. Rose and Taylor stood protectively around him. Holly could tell they both felt worry, concern, confusion, and helplessness. "What's going on? What happened?" Holly asked. "I don't know," replied James. "We were standing around watching the stagecoaches roll in, waiting for our turn, when Rose happened to mention that they were supposed to be pulled by Thestrals. Albus insisted they couldn't be Thestrals, because Thestrals were invisible. And Rose said she couldn't see anything pulling the stagecoaches, so why couldn't they be Thestrals? Then Albus accused Rose of lying when she said she couldn't see anything. And Rose said that Albus was lying when he said he saw black horse-like creatures pulling the stagecoaches. And when Taylor and I said we couldn't see anything in front of the stagecoaches either, Albus totally lost it. He started asking everyone around if they could see anything in front of the stagecoach. And when they kept on saying no, he ran off and found you." James paused to take a breath and then added, "Albus has never carried a joke this far before. He's serious. But he can't be seeing Thestrals. It's just not possible. That's why I thought maybe something else happened in that room, something Albus never told us. But if nothing else happened, then I don't know what to think." "What's wrong with seeing Thestrals?" asked Holly, remembering Paige's comments earlier. "Why isn't it possible? Maybe Albus was just special." "You don't understand," began James. "The only people who can see Thestrals are those who have seen death, and Albus hasn't. So he can't be seeing Thestrals." "Seen death?" Holly's mouth fell open. "Didn't Albus tell you what happened in the room?" she asked slowly, all the while staring at Albus standing on the edge of the platform. Albus continued to radiate waves of guilt and sorrow. Holly hadn't ever talked with her cousin about that day. She'd been too consumed with her own problems afterwards, but she assumed Albus had. They were a close family. "Yeah," replied James, responding to her question. "He ended up in this room, tied down into a chair by some guy named Tom Riddle, and left to starve to death. Then you came into the room and set him free. Albus had horrible nightmares after that," James added, "but he never said about what." Holly looked at James in surprise. "He never told you about the mirror?" James shook his head. "Mirror? What mirror?" Holly walked purposely over to Albus, remembering the last time she had felt such intense pain and sorrow from him. Rose and Taylor stepped aside at her arrival. "He isn't dead, Albus," Holly told him firmly, taking Albus by the shoulder, forcing him to hear her words. "You didn't kill him, and he isn't dead." Albus looked up at Holly with tears streaming down his face. Holly continued speaking, not giving him time to reply. I don't care if you can see Thestrals. It doesn't mean anything. You and I both said goodbye to him only a few hours ago, so he can't be dead. Everything is okay now, Albus, she insisted. James! Holly turned. It was Lawrence speaking. James had followed Holly and was listening to her words to Albus in bewilderment. He, too, turned at the sound of Lawrence's voice. It's the last stagecoach, Lawrence announced, walking up to the group. We've got to take it or walk. Come on, Albus, said James, wrapping his arms on Albus's shoulder and gently guiding him towards the stagecoach. Let's continue this later. With Rose and Taylor's help, everyone quickly loaded into the stagecoach. The group got in and sat down. The doors closed, and the stagecoach took off. Now, said James quietly to Holly when everyone had gotten settled, I think you'd better explain a few things. What's this about a mirror, and what's it got to do with Dad? James clearly realized there was only one male person both Holly and Albus had said goodbye to at the station. Holly hesitated, glancing around the group. Albus was hunched up in the corner of the stagecoach against a wall, his eyes staring blankly out the window, not accepting the repeated attempts of Rose or Taylor to comfort him. This was private. While Holly knew Taylor had been there that night, and so perhaps had a right to know, she barely knew Lawrence, having only seen him occasionally with James. Other than that, she'd seen Lawrence play Quidditch on the Gryffindor team. Should she say anything in front of him? Following her eyes and questioning looks, James added encouragingly, It's okay. Lawrence knows what we know about that night. Holly nodded and took a deep breath, collecting her thoughts. How could she explain things? There was a mirror in the room, she began softly, but it wasn't really a mirror, but more like a window. When you looked into the window, you could see things from the past while they were actually happening. This image of Tom Riddle appeared to explain everything. He said he fixed the mirror so the person tied in the chair could watch Cousin Harry during his second year. Cousin Harry fought a basilisk that year, continued Holly, while he was in something called the Chamber of Secrets. Lawrence nodded knowingly. It was clear he had heard about the Chamber of Secrets, though obviously Rose, James, and Taylor had not. Part of the spell in the room was to make sure that Cousin Harry lost that particular battle. But he didn't, murmured Lawrence. Actually, the spell worked perfectly, and Cousin Harry lost, corrected Holly. Albus was tied down in that chair and could only watch what happened in the mirror. He said that the basilisk opened his mouth wide and bit down and sank his teeth into Cousin Harry's chest. Holly had spoken without emotion, but Albus hunched down further, cringing at her words. No, whispered Rose, horrified. Albus gave a low moan of anguish, remembering. Holly continued. Then it lifted its head with Cousin Harry in its mouth and kind of shook him all around. Albus said he felt all empty inside afterwards. Cousin Harry not only lost the battle, he died. That can't be, protested Rose. Then I walked into the room, added Holly, ignoring Rose's interruption. Albus was still tied in the chair, and the image of Tom Riddle reappeared to explain things all over again. The mirror began to show us Cousin Harry's battle with the basilisk from the very beginning. It was my first time, but Albus's second time to watch the very same battle. I was in the room with Albus this time, and I wasn't tied down. Albus told me what happened earlier and what I had to do to help Cousin Harry, stuff he hadn't been able to do because he was tied in the chair. I did what Albus said, and Cousin Harry killed the basilisk. We broke the spell, and everything went back to normal. Except, concluded Holly softly, I guess the magic of Thestrals doesn't understand that Cousin Harry's death was merely part of a curse that we fixed as if it never happened. James looked at Albus curled up against the wall. Why didn't you tell us? James asked. It was all like a horrible dream, began Albus in a quavery voice. I wanted it to be a dream so bad because otherwise it meant that... Albus broke off, gulping. Then he resumed. I know you and Dad said it all happened, he added, addressing Holly, but it was so much easier to believe that it had been a horrible dream. I convinced myself it was all a dream, but then I saw the creatures pulling the stagecoach. Albus sniffed and wiped his wet face, smearing dirt everywhere before continuing. I couldn't believe they were Thestrals. They couldn't be Thestrals, because then it meant that it hadn't been a dream after all, and that I had... You did not kill Cousin Harry, interrupted Holly sharply, trying to break through that wave of depression she could feel settling over Albus. Your dad is not dead, and it was not your fault. What's more," she added, "you beat him." Huh? Was that a glimmer of hope in Albus's emotions? "You were a first-year student with little knowledge of the dark arts. Neither of us had any," Holly added. "And you beat one of the cleverest wizards around. If the others didn't already know who Tom Riddle really was, let them figure it out later. Albus knew." "Tom Riddle never intended for anyone to come out of that room alive," continued Holly firmly. "You not only came out alive, but you broke his curse and fixed things back up the way they should have been." "But you—" "They were your ideas," reminded Holly. "I didn't know what was going on. I couldn't have done any of it without you. Look around," she pleaded. Albus reluctantly looked at the faces in the stagecoach, all of them looking back at him filled with worry and concern. "The Thestrals may remind you that there was a really awful day last year," continued Holly, "but your dad is still alive. James is alive. Rose, Taylor, and Lawrence, they're all alive. Their very presence should remind you every day that you beat him. You beat Tom Riddle and lived to tell the tale." Albus shifted uncertainly. His guilt and depression seemed to recede as he considered Holly's words. "I did, didn't I?" he finally agreed, slowly, thoughtfully. "You did," agreed Holly firmly, "and that's not something many people can honestly claim. Like only one other person, to be exact. Cousin Harry." Both Holly and Albus knew that, too. Albus seemed to sit straighter after that, taking pride in his accomplishment. They rode along in silence, and then Rose finally spoke. "I'm sorry I called you a liar earlier," she said softly. "I didn't know that you might actually be able to see them. It's no big deal if you can see Thestrals, really," she continued, "especially as Uncle Harry isn't actually dead. Not now, not anymore. I mean, he must have been, but—" "This is weird to talk about," she finally blurted in frustration. "Tell me about it," muttered Albus, and everyone laughed a bit, which broke the tension. Even Albus joined in, uncertainly, laughing at his unintentional joke. "So, you really got to see Harry Potter's fight with a basilisk?" inquired Lawrence curiously when the laughing subsided. "Yes," replied Holly. "Interesting," said Lawrence. "And it was he that did the fighting and nobody else?" "Of course," replied Albus, taking offense at the question. "Who else?" "Well, I've read quite a few underground biographies on Harry Potter, and they can't seem to agree about what happened that second year." "What do you mean?" asked James. "I haven't read anything. Where are you finding these biographies?" "Oh, they're around if you know where to look," replied Lawrence casually. "But nothing I would ever bother you with, James. They're interesting reading, but mostly filled with rumor, speculation, and innuendos. It's really hard to do a biography when the main characters won't talk." "Oh." Then James added, "I've never heard a thing about a basilisk fight." "Frankly," continued Lawrence, "until now, I wasn't sure your dad ever fought a basilisk. Some biographers maintained the whole incident never happened at all, that it was a publicity stunt designed to further the Harry Potter name. After all, there's no eyewitness accounts, none that have come forth to speak, no corroborating evidence, and no one even seems to know where this Chamber of Secrets is located within Hogwarts, except maybe Harry Potter, and of course he isn't talking." "He wouldn't," agreed James. "Anyway," continued Lawrence, "all the accounts seem to agree that the Chamber of Secrets was opened that year, and Ginny Weasley went missing." "Mom was involved, too?" asked James sharply. "So they say," confirmed Lawrence. "There was supposed to be a message written in blood on one of the school walls saying, 'Her skeleton will lie in the chamber forever,' when Ginny turned up missing. But after that, things get speculative." Lawrence leaned back and continued his narrative. "Supposedly, Harry Potter and Ron Weasley went off to rescue Ginny, but so did Defense Against the Dark Arts instructor, Professor Gilderoy Lockhart. All four returned together. Some biographers claim Harry Potter killed the basilisk all by himself. Others think there is no way a second-year student could have killed a basilisk alone, so if he did it, Ron must have helped. Maybe even Ginny, too. Others insist Professor Lockhart did it, with or without the help of Harry and Ron, most likely without. Professor Lockhart was a well-known dark arts hunter at the time. He had written numerous books detailing his experiences and was obviously quite capable of defeating a basilisk on his own. Unfortunately, Professor Lockhart returned from the secretive chambers with his mind so muddled that he could never give a proper account of what happened. Some biographers go so far as to accuse Harry Potter of attacking Professor Lockhart, so the real truth would never be known. Dad would never, started Albus defensively. I know that, agreed Lawrence easily. I never said I believed it. I'm just telling you what they say, and none of the accounts mention Tom Riddle in connection with the chamber. Lawrence fixed his blue eyes on Albus. So, what really happened? Albus leaned back in his seat, his eyes rolled up a bit, remembering. It was just Dad and Tom Riddle, and there really was a basilisk, and it was huge. Tom Riddle was there? Whispered Rose, her eyes wide. It was clear Rose knew who Tom Riddle really was. Yeah, replied Albus, and I think he was directing the basilisk. No Ron Weasley? No Professor Lockhart? Inquired Lawrence. No, insisted Albus, warming to the questions. There weren't any adults around. Tom Riddle was a student, too, in school robes. Mum was there lying on the ground, but she never moved the whole time, he added. She looked dead, but she couldn't have been, as she's still alive. Interesting, said Lawrence thoughtfully. I wonder where they were. How did Harry kill it? With a sword of Gryffindor, replied Albus proudly. He thrust it straight up into the roof of the basilisk's mouth. Wow, said Taylor admiringly. I wish I could have seen that. Albus straightened in his seat, pleased to have been part of something unique. It was pretty exciting, he admitted, and then Taylor added, except for the chair part. Yeah, agreed Albus ruefully. That chair was really uncomfortable. But the view was pretty good. Everyone laughed. Holly leaned back in her seat and relaxed a bit. Albus's mood had lightened considerably, and if he could crack jokes about the experience, even better. She wasn't able to make jokes about her experience that day, but fortunately no one asked her to. The stagecoach slowed and stopped with a gentle bump. The doors swung open. They had arrived at Hogwarts. James climbed out. He offered Holly a hand, helping her out too. Then, while Lawrence unloaded their things, James proceeded to help Rose out. Taylor and Albus scrambled out of the coach next. I guess I understand all those letters you sent to Dad last year, said James cheerfully to Albus as the stagecoach rolled off. Albus shrugged self-consciously. When the sorting is over, let's you and me take a trip to the Owlry and send Dad a letter. I'm sure he'd love to hear from you, and will be happy to write back. Albus nodded. That's a great idea, he said solemnly. The group made their way to the great hall, stopping right outside the entrance. Albus, suggested James, why don't you and Taylor clean up a bit first and then meet us inside? We'll save you a place. Albus nodded. The tears had dried, but his face was smudged with dirt and mud. Come on, Albus said to Taylor, and the two took off towards the nearest bathroom. Holly, said James, giving her a warm hug, thank you very much for your help. Holly nodded. Any time, she replied, and headed towards the Hufflepuff table.